Good morning. This is your host, Ghazala Alam. Welcome to my podcast, The Ebb and Flow of Life. My guest today is Madhu Uppal. Madhu holds a master's degree in food and nutrition from Delhi University and a master's and doctoral degrees in educational administration and leadership from the University of Illinois and Aurora University, respectively. Madhu retired from a district level administrative position in 2010. Madhu has been a freelance writer and has produced a CD of Punjabi songs and written and published an illustrated book of Hindi poems for children. Good morning. Madhu, I first met you through the Club of Indian Women. You have been affiliated with this group for many years. Share with us a little bit of what this involvement looks like.
Good morning, Ghazala. Thank you for having me at your podcast. I am so delighted to be here. Regarding your question about my affiliation with Club of Indian Women, I've been part of the club for nearly 35 years. Over the years, I've served in many positions. Initially, this involvement was in the form of writing and editing the CIW newsletters, something that I could do at any time of the day or night, since my days were pretty packed with family and career responsibilities. More recently, I accepted officers' positions, serving as secretary, vice president, and then president of Club of Indian Women. I love the organization and I'm so glad to be a part of it. Now, while with CIW, I have helped organize events like Literary Slam, book discussions, holiday celebrations, picnics, etc.
When did you first become involved in community work?
When I look back, Ghazala, I realized that I began community work before I knew what community work was. One day I joined my neighbor and got involved in an organization called Hindu Satsang. My interest in writing meant taking over responsibilities for the newsletter and taking charge of participation in folk fairs. Then one day I read an article in the local paper that the PTO of the school my daughter attended was looking for an assembly chair. Now, mind you, I had no idea what an assembly chair was, but had this pull to get involved. So I called the number that was printed in the newspaper, and when I got there, I realized that the person who'd be assembly chair would be identifying performers and artists for school assemblies. This is something I really enjoyed, and then I carried my pregnant self to visit schools in the area to evaluate the performers. Later, I became a volunteer for the local library, where I would take books to homebound seniors. And there too, I took my young daughter with me, and so she got to know my two seniors very well. Before long, I was serving as Girl Scout troop leader and Great Books volunteers. Later, I became involved with the Homeowners Association where I'm presently living, and there too, I became in charge of the newsletters when they used to be the paper kind.
People often say that they just don't have time to volunteer. How did you find time for community work?
Time. Well, Ghazala, I started my first volunteer work when my middle daughter was a newborn. And at that time, I was working part-time as a dietitian. Now, time, as you know, is a finite thing, and it was not always easy. But as my daughters got older, I made them partners in my volunteer work. When I wrote newsletters, my daughters would help me staple, fold, and stamp them. They loved going to the post office to drop the whole lot of them into the mailbox. Later, my little one went with me and got to know my two seniors to whom I was delivering books. The fact is, one can always find time for doing something one is passionate about. I always took my community work and volunteering very seriously, but never found it a burden. If anything, I found it rejuvenating.
Do you find yourself leaning towards a particular type of community involvement? Children, women?
Since I started volunteering first with children related activities, I did develop a soft spot for that. But when I got involved in women related organizations, I got to find them just as fulfilling. My work has included serving on the boards of so many diverse organizations like theater companies, social service agencies, public libraries, cultural and educational organizations. So I guess the short answer after this long answer is no. I don't really lean toward any particular type of involvement. I think the biggest change that has occurred is that where at one time I was on the front line of volunteers, today I'm on the boards where my experience and guidance are what organizations might be looking for, rather than physical labor. While I was working as a volunteer with Dupuy Children's Museum, it struck me that perhaps my talents would be better utilized on boards of organizations rather than doing this physical labor. My body was certainly ready for the less physically taxing work.
In your opinion, what motivates a person to volunteer, to become involved in the community?
I can't speak for others, but what has motivated me to volunteer is a sense that it is my moral responsibility to serve the community that I live in and the organizations that are devoted to improving lives in this community. I had no experience or understanding of what volunteer work was when I came to this country, but I have come to see that it is the volunteer spirit, the desire to serve others that make this a truly great country. I volunteer because it makes me feel good about myself. The dynamics of the boards, etc., are quite different than a paid job, and I find those interactions to be very invigorating. And becoming involved in a community makes me feel like I matter. Yes, you do get a lot of rewards from the job, but the rewards from the community work are quite unique.
What would your recommendation be if someone wants to get involved in community service?
My recommendation, if somebody wants to get involved, my recommendation would be just do it. If there's an organization that you are familiar with, perhaps admire, then go and seek volunteering opportunities there. More than 40 years of community and volunteer work, I can say with great confidence that the work itself is the reward. I would urge all your listeners to ask themselves, how can I make my community even better? And then go and start doing something. No matter how small you may think your effort is, it is going to make a difference. Thank you. Thank you, Ghazala, so much. I really enjoyed talking to you. I'm glad to be here today. And thank you, listeners.
Madhu, thank you so much for being on my podcast. The satisfaction and pride that comes from helping others are important reasons to volunteer, and the feelings of fulfillment can be endless. Thank you once again.